everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, it's not like always, because today we're talking about everyone's favorite topic. Tony, we're talking antitrust legislation. Tony, no, stop, don't change the podcast just yet. This is important. You got to kind of understand this. We will try to make it fun. I will try to read as few statutes as possible. No 10.3.3.2 today, probably.
At least not yet. That will eventually happen once all of this stuff gets settled. But I do want to talk about the House versus NCAA thing that is happening and NIL. But the first thing I want to talk about to get to that point was, and this is going to be a Ross Dellinger heavy show, him and Pete Thamel are the two best guys nationwide in college football in terms of like the big picture thing. Ross Dellinger has been doing a great job for Yahoo with all of this NCAA stuff. And so something that he tweeted out on Wednesday was a conversation with the bowl season director. And bowl season it's exactly what it sounds like. It's got a director, basically. You wouldn't think it does, but it does because it's an entire season. Bowl season director Nick Carparelli told Yahoo Sports in Phoenix that he expects NIL to soon come in-house and for athletes to sign binding compensation contracts with schools that will require them to play in bowls and college football playoff games, eliminating or greatly reducing opt-outs. And we've been talking for a while now about how NIL is going to come in-house. How exactly that happens and what exactly that will entail, we'll get into a little bit later. But the idea that this is something that has been coming on, like if you bring it in-house or, like why are players allowed to opt out when they've signed deals for money for play, essentially. And so this would perhaps eliminate that by making that part of the deal, part of the compensation, especially if it's in-house. Then maybe there's more recourse for the schools. I don't know whether you hold that last big check or the last quarterly check before until after the postseason. But I know this is something that has been going on for a while and wanting to get fixed for a while. And it's one of those things like you don't even expect. There was no chance Marvin Harrison was going to be playing in the bowl game last year, and we've seen it every year. Who's going to opt out this year? Who's going to opt out next year? I'm still wondering exactly how holding out, or I sure want to get that, I don't know, $185,000 check is going to outweigh, well, I sure don't want to get hurt and ruin my $40 million career.
Yeah, I think there are certainly questions about how these things are going to be structured and how they're going to be enforced. And if you're a school like Ohio State, is it really in your best interest if you miss the college football playoff to basically strong-arm people into playing in a bowl game, and then if someone gets hurt then and it hurts their draft status, that feels like that's probably not really going to be in your long-term best interest. I do want to have you back up, Tony, and I just want you to tell the listeners again, who was it that talked to Ross Dellinger and explained all of this?
It was the bowl season director, Nick Carparelli. He directs the season of the bowls.
So if you, Tony, were in the position of being the person who wants to direct the season of the bowls, and you had seen participation numbers dropping, and in some cases interest level in some of your bowls dropping as you have guys opting out, and you're probably trying to negotiate future contracts with TV entities about your games, it feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it feels like it would be in your best interest to kind of go, nah, bro, we've got this. We have got this fixed. The solution is coming. It's not going to be a problem. Don't worry. Trust me, bro. I can fix it. My dad has a whole bunch of tools. We can fix this. I don't know that this is going to be such a clean and easy solution as the director of the bowl season might have you believe, just because I think there are questions about exactly how enforceable these deals will be, how they're going to be structured, if it's even in the school's best interest to try and enforce these. I'm not sure the hit to Ohio State. Let's just go back to let's say the Fiesta Bowl with Ohio State and Notre Dame like 10 years ago now, 9 years ago now, where Jalen Smith, the linebacker for Notre Dame, got hurt and blew out his knee in the bowl game, was really kind of never the same, probably hurt his draft stock quite a bit, blowing out his knee in a game that he now would have almost certainly opted out of. So if in that case Notre Dame had kind of twisted his arm a little bit and said, no, you have to play or we're going to withhold your last NIL payment, that probably is not a great look for Notre Dame if that's how that all plays out, and then that leads to a loss of potentially a significant multiple of whatever your last NIL payment was in terms of lost NFL earnings and your first contract, and maybe you never get to that second contract. And that just feels like, I don't know that this is in the players or the school's best interests, and I don't know that the schools and the players are necessarily going to be willing to work against their best interests to serve the best interests of the bowl season folks. But I understand why the bowl season folks would want to have that message out there that, oh yes, certainly they are.
Well, and with these 12-team playoff and whatever the expansion 14-team or whatever it happens now, the bowl games have been continue to be diminished, and so you've got to try to do what you can do. I don't think that if you don't make it in a 12 or 14-team playoff, the only purpose for having a bowl game, for say Ohio State does not make the playoffs, the only reason for them to have to go play in a bowl game at this point is for next year. So, do you really need somebody who would rather opt out taking those reps? Do you need Marvin Harrison taking those reps that could go to Carnell Tate? No, you'd rather just you've already moved on to next year. Yeah, sure. Well, we want to do right by the seniors. You can, do right however there's only so much right you can do by the seniors because you've missed the playoffs, and that's where the weight of the season now is. So do right by the seniors by taking care of them after football as best you can. And how come the coaches are tasked with doing right by the seniors, but the juniors aren't? Some of the juniors I'm just going to, or the seniors that are leaving, like, you want to do right by the seniors are opting out as well. So where is the real need to do that when, as I said, the bowl game is about next year more than, in my opinion, probably not in the coaches' opinions, but more about next year than this year, especially when you're talking lower levels now. If Ohio State does not make a 12 or a 14 team playoff, that season is a disaster. This is Gator Bowl 2011 territory.
Yeah, there was a tweet, I think, that got put out that Ohio State had never finished lower than 7th during the 4-team college football playoff era. So they would have made it every single year. So there has not been a team going back to, like you said, the 2011 team, and even before that, probably not. You might have to go back to like 2004 for a season that was not a weird interim coach kind of season where Ohio State would have missed the playoff, like clearly missed the playoff. So, yeah, you're talking about the almost generational disaster of a season by the Ohio State standard to miss the college football playoff in a 12-team format. So, yeah, I don't think this is going to be necessarily the clean and easy solution that the bowl season folks would like you to think it is, because you have players dealing with their best interest, you have schools dealing with their best interest, and those are not necessarily always going to align with the bowl season's best interest. And there was also a I don't mean to do like Twitter digest here, but I'm going to paraphrase. There was a tweet I saw a couple days ago that was basically, so you're going to have a deal, you're going to have a contract with your school that's going to be enforceable, and your compensation is going to be tied to your performance. And so it's like, oh, so they're athletes now. It's like, no, they're not. They're employees now. No, we're not employees. This is just NIL. It's like, well, that sounds an awful lot like an employer-employee relationship. So a lot of this stuff, it all sounds good. and we'll get into the House case in a minute and why this is probably a very good idea for the NCAA. But this is not a permanent solution to anything right now. This is this is the NCAA running around with just buckets of water, just throwing buckets of water on different house fires and trying to put it out. It's like, oh, so this is a sprinkler system. I was like, no, I'm just running around in absolute panic trying to put out each individual house fire right now as kind of the whole village is burning. So this is not a permanent solution. This is just okay, let's get through this existential threat and try and survive this, and then that will maybe buy us a little more time to try and put something more permanent into place. But, hey, we might need Congress to do something. So I'm sure, Tony, those clowns in Congress may be at it again, and if they are, well, they might just save college football as we know it.
Well, and we'll see. And so let's get into this House versus the NCAA as we also dive into Congress and what they will be doing. But so this is basically a lawsuit by a doctor who plays by his own rules.
Tony, is it lupus?
Nobody's checked, but it might be lupus. So this is one of several lawsuits being brought against the NCAA regarding amateurism and money that is owed and things like that, and money that is due and money that should be being made by the student athletes, or that they should be allowed to collect and share in the revenue that they are creating. And it's sounding like they're getting closer and closer to a settlement, basically. And I believe the judge in some of these cases has been like, you guys might want to settle, telling the NCAA, like, you really, and the NCAA being the presidents of the university, that's really what the NCAA is made up of. It's the schools. They're like, what you ought to do here is you might want to come up with a number and settle, because you don't want to go through this and lose. And right now the number being talked about is like $1 billion, and there's a 4-year statute of limitations. So it only compensate players from 4 years ago to yesterday-ish. And you're talking, like $1 billion of lost NIL revenue is basically what this is about. And the thing is, if you don't settle and you take this to court and you lose, now you're talking about tripling that and and more, basically, because it may not just be $1 billion, it could be more. And so you could really stand to lose if you lose. And based on every single lawsuit that we've seen come up against the NCAA, Tom, at this point there is no reason to think the NCAA is going to win any kind of court case being brought against them right now.
Yeah, right now the NCAA has been playing the role of the Washington Generals in pretty much every court, from the lowest to literally the Supreme Court, where they lost 9-0 on something. Try to get 9 Supreme Court justices to agree on literally anything, and you had in that case the judges it was basically like a dunk line going up against the NCAA. So the NCAA, I think, has kind of figured out, like, this is not probably a winning strategy for us. And you mentioned there real quickly that the damages are going to be tripled. There is a legal term for this. It is, during the antitrust cases, it's called the damages being trebled, and that is the opposite of being based, if my music understanding is correct. But yes, the damages are tripled in antitrust cases. So therefore, instead of $1 million and change, it was like $4.6 million was the expected loss. And where that money comes from, that's not like, well, Mark Emmert has to pay back his bonuses from a couple of years ago and that'll cover it. That is every NCAA member school. That's where that money comes from. And maybe it comes out of the NCAA tournament revenues, and you're just not getting NCAA tournament revenues for, 10 years or something like that. Like that is going to have a massive impact on schools' bottom lines at a time when schools are potentially, as part of this, looking at paying out $15-20 million a year in terms of additional expenditures. And then, if you're also at that point taking in a lot less money from the NCAA, that is not real good for your balance sheet. I did not finish my accounting degree, but I took enough to remember that a lot less income and a lot more expenses is not great for you in terms of your balance sheets. So this is all about limiting the downside and limiting the fact that you're probably going to lose. It's probably going to be a real disaster. If you settle now, it simplifies everything. The folks going after the money will get the money sooner. You limit the possibility for them that something crazy happens and they don't get the settlement they want, or they don't get the judgment that they want. And also, it allows the NCAA to potentially try to control this a little bit, because what has happened with the NCAA a lot over the last couple of years is you have outside forces going, "I'll fix it," and that has, a lot of this started with, the state of California has ruled that you can basically pay players should control their NIL rights, and the state of Florida has ruled that the players can control their NIL rights. And at that point, the NCAA lost control. They lost contain at that point. And you're now seeing new states. Virginia just passed one where the schools can pay players directly, potentially, for their NIL starting very soon. So what the NCAA is desperately trying to do is make the House case go away, because that is the single biggest existential threat to the organization and to its members, but also desperately trying to gain control of how is this problem going to be solved. And even if they do kind of solve it right now, this is not a permanent solution. This just buys them some time, a span of 5 years or so, to then potentially put a more permanent solution in place involving maybe congressional action, maybe legislative action at state level. I mean, you don't know exactly what it is. This is just, okay, this is Apollo 13, and we've got to figure out a way to use this sock and this, this roll of duct tape and this wad of chewing gum, and we've got to fix the thing before we run out of oxygen, and then we'll figure out how to get the spaceship back down to Earth.
Well, if you ever want to suck the oxygen out of something, bring up politics. And I don't remember who exactly it was. They're all the same. But basically, one of the Congress people was like, we're not going to save you. We will help you. You need to save yourself, and then we can talk. And this is really where a settlement would do that, because it's not just about back pay. It's also about future pay and how things would be set up and what this model would look like. And one of the proposals, or I guess one of the things being socialized right now among presidents and administrators, would be like a $15 to $20 million revenue sharing thing per school. Ohio State brings in however $200 million a year, or whatever. 15 or 20 of that would go to their athletes, mostly football. I mean, it's the biggest team anyway. So, and it's also the one that brings in money, and more money than all of the others, certainly. So not everybody would be able to do that. And that's also one of these things that I think the main attorney in bringing this case, who's bringing others, is like, one of his points is they're not all of these schools are not created equal, and they shouldn't be treated equally. The schools that can afford to do this can do it, and the schools that don't have to. But when these Power 4 schools now are generating so much revenue, and they have this TV money, they have all of this money coming in, some of that should be going to the athletes. Toledo's not bringing in enough to share 15 to 20 million, 10 to 15 million with their athletes. Go look at the MAC television contracts compared to the Big Ten and the SEC, and you're talking like the entire conference is not making what one team is making. So vastly different worlds that everybody is living in. But if they can get this settlement done, and whatever that looks like, you said 5 years, and Ross Dellinger is saying it might give them 8 to 10 years until the next round of lawsuits, because that's just the way things are, whether it's, the collective bargaining of the athletes union or whatever it's going to be called. You sign a 5-year deal, and because good luck getting an 8 or a 10-year deal out of the first players union of college sports. It's not going to happen, because this is going to be a learning process, and you're never going to want to give up that much control. So 8 to 10 years seems pretty lofty in that. And also the way the sport is moving right now, the revenue is going to be changing in different ways, from cable, which is whatever that is, to streaming, to whatever things are going to look like. We've seen. Ask the ACC how they feel about projecting too far ahead right now, Tom.
Right. The ACC is currently in I keep using the phrase existential crisis involving different entities, but that's really what they're in right now, where they are currently held together by the grant of rights that's been signed there, and that's the only thing that's keeping everyone from just scattering to the winds, because everyone is upset because they signed a deal in the mid-2010s in order to get the ACC network set up, and they signed like a 20-year deal, and it doesn't expire till 2036. And the market has changed quite a bit, but their deal has not. So they are making substantially less than pretty much all of the other leagues, especially the SEC and the Big Ten, and they're not really able to compete financially. And just, you mentioned Toledo earlier in terms of not being able to compete financially with, Ohio State and schools like that. Ohio State has an athletic budget annually of north of $200 million. Toledo's is $35 million, give or take. Kent State, which is a smaller mag school, is $25 million. So Ohio State might be spending potentially close to as much just on paying players directly, if this model goes into effect as it's sort of laid out, as Kent State's entire athletic budget. And, yes, they're playing the same sport and they're doing it in the same state, but really they're kind of not. This is really kind of two teams or organizations playing at very different levels. And this is, I think, a reflection of the fact that Ohio State and Louisiana Monroe, or Alabama and Troy, or Michigan and Eastern Michigan. Michigan and Eastern Michigan are separated by about 7 miles and probably about $180 million or so in athletic revenue every year. It's kind of the same thing, but it's really very much not. So I do wonder how there are a lot of conflating and conflicting factors at work here, where you mentioned, hey, $15-20 million, that's all going to go to, or mostly going to go to football players because that's where the revenue comes from. They got to figure out the Title IX piece of this, because the Title IX piece of this says that you've got to have, basically equivalent opportunities for female athletes as you do for male athletes. So is that going to mean equivalent NIL deals just in terms of numbers? You have to pay an equivalent number? Is that going to be that you have to pay an equivalent amount? We don't know that yet. I think there's certainly an argument to be made that it might be more of you have to pay an equivalent number of athletes, maybe a set fee. That's what the Charlie Baker NCAA model was. You had to pay basically an equivalent number of female athletes and male athletes, about $30,000 a year. That was something that got floated a couple months ago. But none of this, you don't know this for a fact. The reason I say that's possible is because you're not required to spend the same amount on women's basketball as you are on men's basketball, or you have to spend the same amount on women's sports as you do men's sports. It's just you have to have the same number of scholarships. So, but they have to figure that out. That's not absolutely settled. Like, yeah, absolutely, everyone will be fine with this, because you have the folks who want equivalent access and all the stuff that Title IX set out to do, and you have the market forces which say, yeah, football should be getting a huge chunk of this, and you've got people who are you trying to keep just football going? Because we've had lots of people talk about, hey, this is a great way to go from 20 sports to 6 because we can't pay for all the other sports, because football has subsidized a lot of those other sports financially for decades. So there are just a lot of different parties that are involved in this with a lot of different priorities, and I think it's going to be quite a mess to sort it out, because you're talking about unionizing college athletes. That is not a monolithic voting block by any means. Even if it's football players, you're going to have, Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields had different interests than some other guys back in 2020. And you're going to have, your top level guys who are probably going to be making the top level scale, whatever the NIL deal is. They have different interests than the star field hockey player or the star men's tennis player, or whichever sport. There's a lot of different parties with a lot of different interests, and I think that's going to be a challenge for the athletes and whatever unionization or collective action type group that they put together. I think that's going to be a challenge to figure out, how do you weigh all these different priorities, because everyone has something slightly different that they care about.
Well, and I can't even get into if these players, athletes become employees, and the different states that have different rules for unions of state employees and that sort of thing. Like, there are so many branches to this. And I do like in the Ross Dellinger article talking about Charlie Baker, NCAA president, back in January, the quote in the story from Dellinger is that Baker said he believed the Title IX terminology is more about equal participation and not so much equal amounts. It's that the question again. It's like, well, I think that's what it would mean, but that's another thing that has to get figured out. And so one of the ideas in all of this is that, well, players will just, everything goes in-house. NIL goes in-house. Players, schools will buy the NIL rights from the players. And I'm thinking, how many players aren't signing over their NIL rights to schools? Because there's going to be plenty of them. You'll have QB Eagles on some of these teams, basically, because we saw that in the NFL where you don't necessarily sign over your rights to the Players Association or the QB Club back in the 80s and 90s, or where they're Marvin Harrison was delayed in doing something with the NFL PA or whatever, and wasn't able to put a jersey out. But I don't know why. I don't see all of the players, especially with the number of agents and attorneys and family members they have giving them advice now. I don't think you're going to see all players sign over their NIL rights to schools, and unless it's just some sort of thing where they just handle it, but you can still facilitate. Like, players themselves can still facilitate, and they get it all. It's just the school now becomes part of your agency rather than they're in control of it.
Well, and if the school is part of your agency, then how many more people does the school need to bring in? Mm-hmm. And now the school is, are they bringing in less money from TV deals? We don't know. Are they paying out more money for, to $20 million a year to players, and now you got to add staff?
Why they take a taste.
Yeah. This is one of these things where you read the article, it's like, oh, dust's off hands, problem solved, great work, everyone. And it's like, well, I mean, this could potentially be a step in the right direction, but every time I read one of these articles, I walk away feeling like, well, I guess that's something, but I'm also walking away with like 7 more questions than I had beforehand, because we haven't even talked about, what does the unionization process look like? And I am not going to pretend to be a labor attorney here, but, I've listened to some folks from the NLRB, which is the National Labor Relations Board, talking about this in the past. And, there are pieces of how is this going to shake out, and will unions be recognized, or, will they be able to form will the players be able to form a union? And is that going to be a nationally recognized thing? And some of that depends on, so who's in charge of the government at that given moment? Because you may have different philosophies in terms of what, how you want to run the NLRB. There are just so many moving pieces and parts here, and so many different parties, that I think anyone who's looking at this and going, I know how this is going to get resolved, is... Tony, I don't want to use the word charlatan, but it feels like that is statistically unlikely that you really do understand every single piece and part of this whole deal, because there are so many different parties with so many different interests, and a lot of these things are going to be in conflict. And I doubt that even the folks in charge can say with any great degree of certainty, what is this going to look like in 5 years? Because if you go back 5 years ago, the stuff we're talking about now would have sounded crazy. 5 years ago, here's a college football player standing at a car dealership getting handed keys to the car. You would have thought that was, investigative reporter from rival school sitting in the bushes with a long, a telephoto lens taking pictures of that, and boy, this is going to be a big scandal. And now it's like, and now this is a TV commercial. So things have changed so much in the last 5 years, in such unpredictable zigs and zags, that I don't I don't even want to begin guessing what things might look like 5 years from now. And, whatever, college football will be here one way or another, but what's that actually going to look like and what's that structure going to be? Good luck.
You mentioned the car thing, and I immediately thought back to one of my first years on the beat, talking with somebody about somebody else on the beat who was known for writing license plates down on the cars in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center parking lot, because this would have been around 2010 or so, and it would have been around that time where there was stuff going on, and now it's like, well, if I want to get a plate, I can just watch the commercial. That's what I'll do. If I want to find out who's taking a sledgehammer to car windshields, I'll just go watch the local car dealership in State College and say, hey, that's Julian Fleming doing that. I don't need to investigate any further. There are a bunch of different, we'll start wrapping up, but like you said, there are just so many different variables. Like an athletic department like Ohio State with 36, 37 schools or programs, sports, and that $15 to $20 million is not going to go nearly as far as the $15 to $20 million will go at a South Carolina. So in terms of like the non-revenue sports, where that's why Charlie Baker had the idea, like, let's just have a flat rate for everybody, that you're going to get at least this. That way there may not be such huge advantages and disadvantages and disparities between certain schools in terms of like, this is how much we can pay a gymnast, and Ohio State can't because they've got 35 other sports. And it's like, well, that's, too bad, pay more. So stuff like that. I do wonder, all of the, you think of the Ohio State practice facility and everything that they're given in terms of mental health, food, all of these things, that's where the money has had to go because it has to go somewhere. Now it can go to the players. Do they then have to start, does this become like a coal mine type of thing where you've got the company store where you work for a coal mine, everything that you buy from the store, you coal mine pays you, but you have to go pay for a shovel for your house, and it's like $14, and all of the money that you bring in, you give back to the company store. Is it still going to be free meals at all of these schools? Do they start to penny pinch? Because I remember, I think it was Bobby Carpenter talking about his time at the Cowboys, and I may be wrong, but it was somebody talking about their time in the NFL where their meals weren't free; they were taken out of their checks, and it's like that's the NFL doing that. Now they're not trying to recruit anybody, so that's, I think, always going to be the thing that wins out. Like, why do I have to pay for my food here? I don't have to do it at Georgia. So it's one of those things that kind of maybe fixes itself, because if one school, if other schools aren't doing it, then you can't do it because it becomes a disadvantage for you. But yeah, so many different things that still have to be sorted out. And I'll go back to the original bowl season director, Ross Dellinger's tweet saying that, this guy, Nick Carparelli, expects NIL to soon come in-house, soon. And then Ross relays the full quote from Carparelli, and it goes this way. I had a meeting recently with Charlie Baker, and we discussed that. On the national level, what needs to happen for everybody is collectives need to be brought in-house, and universities need to manage that. I think what will come with that is we'll see agreements, much like any other employment agreements, blah, blah, blah. He's saying that's what needs to happen, but it's being put forth as in it's happening soon. And the quote didn't necessarily follow with that it's going to be happening soon. Now, I do think that's what eventually happens. Everybody knows what needs to happen and they're progressing forward to it, but it's like each step of the way, you've got a little obstacle that you've got to figure out first. And you can see everything that you need to do, but you got to watch your toes every step of the way.
And the people who are in charge need to be willing to take steps that they might not be thrilled about taking in order to get where they need to get. Because a lot of the issues that are happening right now, and the fact that everything has just sort of like, the NCAA has at times almost been a passive observer to the things that are happening to it from state governments or individual schools or whatever, where, if they really were trying to draw it up, I doubt that a NIL collective at your school going out and rattling the tin cup, and you the Buckeye fan, having to pay $25 a month to the collective, or the big donor having to pay, writing a big check when a certain player hit the portal or whatever. I doubt that that's really the way they would have set that up, because it doesn't make any sense for, well, okay, it's okay for the players to get paid, but it can't come from the schools. It has to come from outside entities. Like, that's not the way you probably would have drawn that up if you were really doing this from square one. So now they have the potential to maybe, if this does get settled, maybe take a little bit of a deep breath and take a little bit more of a structured look at it, and maybe set it up in a more logical way. Maybe. Tony, the question is, how much do you believe in the people in charge of running college sports, and the fact that they'll be diligent about this and come up with a very structured and thoughtful solution to this that will present no long-term complications? How confident are you on a level of 1 to 10?
10 being most confident and 1 being least confident.
And I will let you know, you are allowed to use negative numbers.
Can I use letters? Can I just go W6? And there are still, as in the Ross Dellinger article, there are still people against it in terms of administrators. And it, like, at some point, you've got to do something, or else, and you can't just continue to live at the bottom of the volcano, because eventually the lava is just gonna overwhelm you. Eventually, you got to stop being that coot, and you got to move. You got to pick up your feet, as you said, and move on. And I think there were several other things I had on my mind, but thankfully they're gone now, Tom. And what this means for Group of Five, that's a whole other. That's an entire show itself. But I think we'll go ahead and call it there and see if anything else comes of this. And it's something that it's happening. So we're just trying to keep you aware of it. And it's certainly a discussion point. College football is going to be impacted by this greatly. And Ohio State is going to be impacted by this greatly. But as we've seen so far, the NIL stuff has helped Ohio State. It's done them some good things. So I wouldn't get too concerned. This will all get figured out. There's too much history, too much money, more importantly, involved for it to go away. So just going to be some bumps in the road along the way. But that will do it. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Go ahead and hit the like if you're watching this on YouTube. Please thumbs up. We do appreciate that. And subscribe to the YouTube channel if you have not yet. As always, you can find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a member there. That is the best way to support us. And right now we're running our spring sale on annual subscriptions. So you get a nice reduced rate there if you sign up now and become an annual member. So check that out at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And that will do it for us today. We will talk to you guys later.